All right. We are recorded and
The attendance sheet.
I do. You may have to click on that one for to activate that screen.
Okay, so I read the chapter on William and Dorothy Carey, and when I read through that, it was really sad and depressing. So there were a lot of negative, like it was only negative about them. So I'll just share whatever the book said, and then so yeah. So first it talked about Carey. So he was born in 1761, and his hometown was Pillsbury, and that's 80 miles from London. And his father was Edmund Carey and his mother Elizabeth, and they had 5 children, and Edmund's mother lived with them as well. Edmund was a schoolmaster, and so when William was 6, and so he had a little bit of education until he was for 3 years until he was 12. And he had a lot of access to books because of his dad. So he read a lot and had a lot of knowledge through that. And then when he was 12, he started to work in the fields, and he had to shift careers because of his allergies, and like it just wasn't the right thing for him, so he became a shoemaker. And that time, he was not trustworthy, and he would lie and steal. And so because of that, he did not want to go to church because he didn't feel like that was the right place for him because of what he did. But then he talked about religion a lot with a fellow apprentice. And so because of him, he started going to his church. And then he joined the Descenders Congregational Church with this friend. He then had to switch masters, and that his boss had a sister, and he married Dorothy. And that time Dorothy was 25 and he was 19. And so Dorothy never attended school. She couldn't even read or write or anything. And they were both very poor, basically their whole lives, but especially that first years. And after their first year of marriage, their daughter Anne was born. And Carey spent a lot of time in preaching and studying, and he studied Greek. And Carey was basically, like, he would go to a church that was really far, like, they had to walk there, or he had walked there, so Dorothy couldn't go with him because she had a little baby. And also with his studying Greek, she couldn't really do that with him because she struggled even with the English alphabet. So there was like, that's what the book said. There was nothing really they had like in common or could together. So she was really lonely and just had her daughter. And then her daughter died, which was really hard on her because that was the only thing she basically did the whole day. And she died of a disease, and then Carey got the same disease, and he had health struggles, and he recovered at the age of 21. And because they were so poor and family came and saw that, they raised money for them to buy a cottage so that they had at least a nicer place to live. Then Carey became a Baptist and joined a Baptist church. And later, like after 1 or 2 years, Dorothy also became Baptist and got baptized. When he was 23, he became a preacher at a Baptist church. And he also was a teacher, which didn't really fit him, and the people didn't really like him, so he became a part-time shoemaker again. And then at one point he wanted to be ordained, but the people people didn't like his preaching, so that didn't happen. What I thought was interesting and kind of sad, the book said that Anne and Harry would rather spend money on books than meat, so they didn't really have that much food. And Dorothy would do the opposite. So they kind of had different mindsets on what they spent their money on, or like what they spent their time on. And he was really talented. He learned Greek, Latin, Hebrew, French, Dutch, and Italian really fast. And between 1785 and 1719, they had 4 children. So Carrie and Dorothy, and then Felix, William, and Peter. And at 31, he published an inquiry into the obligations of Christians. And that time he was 31, and Dorothy was 37, Felix was 8, William was 5, and Peter was 3. And they also had a little daughter, Lucy, but she also died. And that was really hard on Dorothy again, and she had depression. And then, Harry had a desire to go to India, and that time Dorothy was 5 months pregnant. But William wanted to go anyway because he felt like God wanted him to go, and that his family wouldn't be a reason to stay. So they decided that Dorothy would stay in England with the 2 youngest and live with her sister, and Carrie would leave for India with their oldest son, Felix. And they talked about that he would come back after 3 years, after he got a house and got settled in India, and then he would come and get Dorothy and the kids. And then they left, I think, to France, and they couldn't leave yet because of a war, and so they came back to Dorothy and visited her and tried to convince her to come with her. And then after she gave birth, she said she would come, but only if her sister comes with them. And so they joined them. And in their first year, or in the first 9 months, they moved 6 times. And as you can see, it's like every month they moved, basically. And that was really hard on both of them, but especially Dorothy, because she didn't really want to go, so she didn't really see the need of going there. And it was basically just Carrie, and she just joined him because that's what a wife would do. And so after their 3rd stop, they had a lot of health issues, Dorothy and the boys. And then after the 4th stop, Dorothy's sister left, and so she was on her own with Carrie again. And then they had more health issues, and then Peter dies in India. And in 1796, their next baby was born, Jonathan. And because they were all were struggling with health, and Dorothy with depression, they went back to England to recharge and then come back. And so 1799, they came back to India. And the book said that Dorothy couldn't even handle her own children anymore. She couldn't take care of them because she was so depressed. And she always said that everything she had, or she liked, or she enjoyed, was taken away from her. And so other missionaries they went with to India, they helped take care of the children. And then 1807, Dorothy died. And then 6 months after, Carrie got married again to Charlotte. And Carrie said about that was a perfect wife for a missionary, because she also had the desire and she helped him with whatever he did. And then 1821, she dies too. And then Carrie dies 1834. And when I read through this, I I got really sad about what Carrie did, and I don't know how, like, if it actually was that bad or if he took care of her. Like, you never really know. But I think what we have to know is that Carrie really had a desire to go into missions and live for God, and he felt like that was more important than taking his family with, and he thought that that was the way he could obey God, and he would disobey if he would stay. So I think he did the best he could probably with his knowledge, and they didn't really like have counselors or like people who would help them figure that out, and people also didn't really know a lot about missions probably and what to do. And so I think we can't be too hard on Carrie, even though he could maybe do a better job in taking care of them. But he really had a desire to share the gospel, and he did an awesome job with translating. He translated the Bible into a lot of languages. So, yeah, that's about Carrie.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry that it was so negative.
No, that's okay.
Go ahead. Go back. It is really a mystery, isn't it? Trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
Carrie, remember what he called himself? He attributed his success to a word. Remember that word? He said, I am a what? It was a word he used to describe himself that was probably accurate. He said, I can plod. And now, does that word plod, is that familiar to you? A plodder is like, okay, I'll complicate it more. Are you familiar with when we say somebody is the Energizer Bunny? Does that make sense? Okay, they used to sell batteries. They still do. The batteries are Energizer batteries. And so these batteries, they say, just keep going and going and going and going. And they use a little bunny, this little bunny rabbit that just keeps walking and walking and walking, doesn't run, just keeps walking and walking and walking and walking. And so if you call somebody the Energizer Bunny, what that means is that person just keeps on going. And the word plod means the same thing. Somebody plods, somebody just keeps on going. Okay, and he called himself that. He said, I can plod. And I think that Dorothy was not a plodder. He was able to put himself in almost any situation and just keep right on going. The Energizer Bunny, no matter where you put it, it just keeps on. So you wind up, you put the battery in the Energizer Bunny, no matter where you put it, it just keeps on walking. That was Carrie, but that was not Dorothy. And you're right, Miriam, that today we are exposed to so many sources of family, books on the family, books on marriage, books on family and ministry, counseling resources. We have so many things that we can look to, and they didn't have those things. And so how much of it was her fault, how much it was his, I don't know. We have to let God sort that out. But it is a bit of a sad story. He didn't wait very long to remarry. 6 months isn't a very long time after your wife dies. That marriage, in a sense, ended long before she died. They were just existing together. And so, yeah, it's tough. And yet I appreciate the way you concluded by not just criticizing him. He did have a heart for God, and that's the way he saw it. And so you gals, I don't think that you're going to marry a guy who sees it that way. Okay?
I'm not.
Matthew, I don't think you see it that way. So, we're all good. So thank you. Very well done. Okay, so Clara, if you're listening here, you are on for the 29th, which is the Wednesday after Thanksgiving break. I don't remember if I got that to you or not, Clara. If I didn't, my apologies. But your report is for that day. Let me know if you have any questions about that. All right, we need to continue on. Remember, Friday we have our discussion over the next chapter. So give me a moment here to pull up the next chapter.
Yeah.
we had a student in Brazil who he studied a lot about William Carey. And he would always talk about, God's going to give him his Dorothy. And he wanted a wife to serve with. And God gave him his Dorothy. Her name wasn't Dorothy, but she's been serving with him for several years now. Okay. Here we go. See where we are on this. Okay. Thank you. Everybody got this, right? Okay. All right. We finished Roland Bingham. Okay, we're ready for Peter Cameron Scott, correct? That's the guy we're going to talk about next. Ooh, let's see, who likes to sing here? Okay, you like to sing, you will appreciate the struggle that this man had. Okay, that's a picture of his family, and he was very talented as a singer. He was born in Scotland. So who else was born in Scotland? Moffat. Livingston.
And Mary
Slessor. Yep, and probably some others too that we're forgetting. Okay. He came to America at the age of 13. He was just a young boy. And he was a gifted vocalist. So what did he want to do? He wanted to be an opera singer. I don't know if anybody here is into opera music or not. Some people like opera, some people hate it. Has anybody here seen The Phantom of the Opera musical? All right, where'd you see it?
Where did I see
Yeah,
it?
was it on TV or was it?
No, at home.
Okay.
On my computer.
Okay. We saw it on Broadway in New York. We went to New York City in about 2012. And it was the longest running musical in Broadway history. So what's he do? Okay, he's going to go to audition and he probably would have been accepted. He was a very gifted singer. But he's walking up the steps to the Opera House. And I don't know what opera house that was. He was in America. It may have been in New York. I'm not sure. Maybe the book says. And right there, he just has to stop. There's something inside of him that's saying, I can't do this. I can't do this. And he's, God has been dealing with him. I don't know if you've ever been through that or not, where you're ready to make a decision and just something inside is saying, this isn't right. I just can't do this. And this is what he experienced. And so he ends up not even doing his audition. And he decides to prepare for missionary work in Africa. Now, I don't know if Africans like opera or not. Back in that time, 1800s, probably not much opera in Africa. So you think, okay, maybe if he goes to Europe, he could still have an opera career and serve the Lord as a missionary, But no, he goes to Africa.
I think he should have done it for the Africans, and it would have been funny to see how they responded.
Yeah, they probably. I'm guessing that back then, probably very few Africans have ever heard anybody sing an opera. Yeah, it's a style. It's a different style. So he goes to Simpson's College. Which Simpson is this? This isn't Simpson College in Iowa, right? It's New York. So who's the Simpson guy? What's his first name or initials?
AB.
AB. Anybody remember what those stand for? Not that you have to know. Albert Benjamin. Okay, AB Simpson. So he goes to Simpson's College. What was the name of the college? Starts with an N. Nyack. Right. He goes to Nyack College to study. And so he was ordained by A.B. Simpson himself. Isn't that interesting? A.B. Simpson ordained him. It was probably a service. And he left for Africa. And remember, the Simpson had wanted to go where?
Africa.
And he didn't go because?
His wife.
And here's the situation very different, Miriam. Simpson said, I'm not going to go and take my wife if she's not into God. The marriage has got to be. So it's not just a time issue. It really isn't. It's more than that. So he and his brother, he went first, and then his brother actually comes a few months later. Okay. And guess what? Disappointments. His brother suddenly died, right, in Africa. Who else went with a sister?
Lottie Moon.
Yeah. I remember her sister didn't last very long. She went back and actually ended up committing suicide. When you read missionary biographies, you really do have to try to balance out the positive and the negative, Miriam, I'm guessing that if the author of your book, The 25 Surprising Marriages, if he had been writing about other parts of, Carrie's ministry, it would have been much more positive. But the marriage part was the downside. It really was. So he has health issues. His brother dies and he's sick. So he goes back to England to he's from Scotland, but he goes to England to recover. Then he heads back to Africa again after he's feeling better. How many people would go back a second time? We've seen this repeatedly. Go back home, Amy Carmichael had to go back because of illness and recover, and others. And yet they would turn around and go back. And I'm guessing that today, probably a lot of mission agencies and maybe churches would say, the climate there is not going to be good for you. Maybe you should consider serving someplace else. And that may be the right thing to do. Sometimes God uses health issues to say this isn't the place where you should be. The Petersons, right? Samantha Peterson and her siblings, they left Africa, because her dad had malaria so many times. And there was a case where they just were convinced that was God's leading. And I'm convinced they did the right thing. But not everybody feels that way. So he gets sick. His brother dies there. He's sick. But after he recovers, he says, I'm going back. He was convinced that's where God wanted him. So what happens? Well, before they go back, maybe one of the reasons God brought him home, the first time is because God wanted him to establish what is now the African Inland Mission. Oh, can somebody Google that and tell me if that's the current name?
I
think it's changed. Yeah. What is it called now? I don't remember.
It's Africa Inland Mission International.
Okay, just added the word. And it's Africa and not African, right? Yeah, I think that maybe that's a misspelling in my notes. I think it's Africa. One of you brought that up the other day. Okay, I think it was Africa Inland Mission. It was headquartered in the Bible Institute of Pennsylvania. So, and so he and 7 others are commissioned in 1895. Okay, so let me just go back here a second. He was born in 1867, so he's 28 when this happens. He's still a pretty young man. He's already been to Africa. He's back. Maybe 28 sounds old to you guys, but it's getting younger and younger all the time to me. So there is success in that first year when they're there. For instance, more people came. So besides these that went, more ended up coming, and 4 mission stations were open. And do you remember what we said a mission station was probably like? What would it look like? When you hear mission station, what comes to your mind? Are these missionaries living out in the neighborhoods among the people? No, it's probably another name. Remember another word that was used a lot for station?
Compound.
Compound. And I don't know if they would necessarily always be the same, but it's basically a missionary neighborhood. Okay, usually walled because missionaries tended to have things that the Africans didn't have, so they had to build walls and stuff. So you don't hear a lot about that today. Most people now who go as missionaries anywhere want to live among the people. All right. Educational and medical programs were set up. So some of these were doctors. And you got to remember back then, so, missionary nursing, back then, if you were a missionary nurse, you could be expected to do just about anything medically, even surgeries and things like that. We had a guy come to chapel once when I was in college. He served the Lord in Africa. He started describing the way that they did surgeries there with the limited equipment. And Dr. Paul Hartog's dad, Dr. John Hartog II, was professor at that time. So we're all sitting there listening to this guy describing this bloody, this really gruesome procedure. And all of a sudden we hear this thud. We look over and Dr. John II passed out on the floor. We found out later he couldn't stand the sight of blood, so poor guy. But this guy was just going on and on and on. He was in the Chad, Africa, but pretty, he was a funny guy. And then they also worked on finding ways to help people learn the language, okay? Remember, at this time, most people that are going to the mission field, how do they learn the language?
By being there.
You just figure it out. You just mingle with people. So most missionaries at this time in history really probably couldn't give you a good explanation of the grammar and tenses and things like that. They just learn by listening and imitating. Okay. But these guys are kind of taking it a step farther, and they're coming up with tools that can be used for language acquisition. Now, a lot of mission agencies won't even let you get involved in full-time missionary activity until you have passed some sort of proficiency test, okay, to be able to say, I'm ready to minister. Because a lot of missionaries would never learn the language well enough. They just want to get involved in the work, So I had to spend a year learning the language and then taking a test before I was able to assume my regular responsibilities. Yeah. So, well, here's another case of a short career, right? Gets sick. Again, I don't remember if it's malaria, but a pretty good chance. His mother actually nursed him. He went back, again to Europe. His mother nursed him, but after 14 months, it wasn't like he died on the way back. He was back for over a year. Still couldn't get better. So you know that when he got sick the second time, it was pretty bad. Died in 1896. He was born in, I'm sorry, what year was he born again? Born. He was born in
1967.
67, so he died, how old was he? 39? Yeah. And there were people who would say, what a wasted life. Here's a guy that had a beautiful voice. He could have made a career out of opera. He could have even used his musical career as a way of reaching out to people with the Lord, Could have had a ministry. How many Christians are there in the opera world? Not very many. And yet he goes and wastes his life in Africa, right? There are people that would look at it that way. How would you respond to that accusation? It does seem to make sense, right? He had a gift. God gave him a gift he could hardly use in Africa. So why didn't he use his gift? Be a singer and be a lighthouse for Christ in the music world. How would you respond to somebody making that accusation?
I think the Christians in Kenya would say differently. The Christians that people are, the missionaries are able to reach because he started Africa and the mission.
Okay.
It's still going on today.
It still is today. Yeah. And if you tell me that you are absolutely convinced that God is burdening your heart to go to such and such a place, I am not going to challenge that. I just can't. Who am I to say, nah, I don't think so? Because you're gifted in this way, and you struggle with that and that, so you shouldn't go. God just doesn't always deal with things the way that we evaluate them. And I believe that Peter Cameron Scott followed God's direction for him. And what he did by God's leading. Was he ever able to use his voice to sing? I'm sure that he learned this. I'm sure he did a lot of singing in Africa. Maybe it wasn't opera. Maybe he learned the way the Africans sing. I don't know. But not a wasted life. So who else did we study that died fairly young?
Brainerd.
Brainerd, and who died about the same age he did later on, that was actually a fan of David Brainerd. Remember that guy? He was influenced by Brainerd, and he died at about the same age that Brainerd died. Remember who that? He ministered among the Muslims. That was Henry Martin. Remember him? He also died very young. 40's not as young, but still 39. And so, yeah, Sharon, like you said, the ministry of AIM just goes on. Nobody in those days expected missionaries to establish anything significant in Africa. You're just going to go there and die. And so this did not happen. All right, let's talk about this gentleman. When you think of C.I. Scofield, what immediately comes to mind?
Scofield Bible.
Right. When I was saved at 14, the Scofield Reference Bible was the most popular English version in evangelicalism. And I never even knew that Scofield was a missionary until I started teaching here. Any of you, like, either you have a Scofield Bible or maybe your parents have a Scofield Reference Bible? Miriam, is a Scofield Bible in Germany translation. And it's not a translation, but Scofield did not translate the Bible. What he did is he took the concept, if you take a regular Bible with no notes or margins or anything, and he's the one that really popularized the idea of putting margins with cross references and footnotes and things. And so the Scofield Study Bible, it was called the Scofield Reference Bible, but later on they kind of changed the word to Study Bible. Ryrie Study Bible, MacArthur Study Bible, Truck Driver Study Bible, any conceivable kind of study Bible. But he was one of the pioneers of that. And he actually, the first one that he did, the first two were both in the King James Version. The first one was the old King James with all this these and thous and whatnot and and all that stuff. And so then he came out later with what he called the New Scofield Reference Bible. And that one, he still used the King James, but he didn't use the these and the thous. It was you, okay? And some of those really difficult Old English words he changed. Like when Paul says in Philippians, what I will do, I what not, W-O-T, I know not. He changed it from what not to know not. And so that's the Bible I got, the New Scofield Reference Bible. So that's just, I thought it would be good for you to know that because it really was one of the early study Bibles in the English language. He was from Michigan. I'll forgive him for that. I'm from Ohio, But and when Dr. Hill wears his Michigan, his Detroit Red Wings hockey jersey, I forgive him too. 1843, but he was raised in Tennessee, which is significant. Why? Because he was involved in the Civil War. If he'd have stayed in Michigan, he probably would have been fighting on the north side. Instead, he serves under Robert E. Lee. Very much, I just said because I don't know how much you studied the Civil War, but I've often thought if I could choose any general in the Civil War that I would like to fight under, it would probably be Robert E. Lee. Even though he was a Southern general, he was a very godly man, and he was a brilliant military genius. The North won, and I'm glad the North won, but Lee was quite a godly man. Okay. He after the war was over, General Grant, who was the leading general at the end of the war, he eventually was elected president, and he invited Scofield to serve with him. He served the Kansas legislation, then he became a U.S. attorney under President Grant. Why did Grant do that? Why would Grant bring somebody from the South, from the Confederate Army, to serve? Because he was trying to reunite the nation. See, if you ever get a chance to go to Galena, Illinois, anybody been there? You been there? Galena is about 3 hours. It's right across the Mississippi River, across from Dubuque. You should go. It's where Grant lived, afterwards, and there's a Grant house there you can visit. It's really cool. All right, but the guy was a slave to drinking. He wasn't the only one. That was a huge problem. Many of the people in the South, after the war was over, they escaped the reality of the war, by turning to drinking. But he came to Christ through one of his clients. So here he is, acting as a lawyer, and one of his clients was a Christian, and God used that client to lead him to the Lord. Really interesting. And then eventually, he became ordained as a congregational minister, and he pastored in Dallas, Texas for 13 years. This would be after the time that he served under General Grant. Okay. He moves to Texas and pastored there. Now, I don't know why he moved to Texas. Maybe it was because he heard the church there heard about him and they asked him to come or whatever, but it ends up. He also founded Philadelphia College of the Bible in Philadelphia. So the guy's all over the map. Okay, so he's born in Michigan, then he's in Tennessee, then he goes back to Washington, D.C. after the war, Kansas, and then to Washington, D.C., and then he goes to Dallas, down in Texas, then he's up in Philadelphia. He was all over the place. That university still exists. It's called Cairn University now. He started that, okay? So, there's another fruit of A.B. Simpson's idea of a Bible Institute or Bible college. And Schofield gets involved in missions. And he actually met Hudson Taylor. I don't know if you knew that, but he went to the Niagara Bible Conference. Have you guys studied Niagara Bible Conference in any of your other classes, like theology classes? Dr. Cole talks about that in one of his courses. The Niagara Bible Conference took place in Niagara Falls, New York, right? Anybody here been to Niagara Falls before? Any New York on the Canadian side? Okay. Well, it was a Bible conference that for many years, evangelicals met there to discuss key topics like dispensationalism and Reformed theology and all those sorts of things. It was a pretty significant conference that went for several years. And so he attended that conference, Schofield did, and Hudson Taylor happened to be there one year, and he met him. And so you just look at the connections that God gives these guys. And then he started hearing about the needs of Costa Rica. Now, probably not from Hudson Taylor, because Hudson Taylor was where? Where he served? China. So this is Costa Rica. Remember that at this time in history, not very many missionaries were going to Latin America. Okay, Latin America just wasn't viewed, as pagan place that India and China and Africa were. Catholicism, it wasn't evangelicalism, but a lot of people thought you're wasting your money going to a Christian continent. I'll tell you, Latin America is anything but Christian. I mean, it's better now than it was. So he hears about Costa Rica, and he founds the Central American Mission. This guy God gifted him with organizational skills. He organizes the Philadelphia College of the Bible, and he organized the Central American Mission. The year that my grandmother was born, 1890. And the first 10 years there were 25 missionaries serving in 5 different countries: Costa Rica, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. Let's see, Laurel, which one of those were we looking at one time? Was it Honduras? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Most of that would be part of what we used to call Central America, but you don't see that designation as much in geography nowadays. It's now North and South America, pretty much. Yeah. That's pretty good, within the first 10 years, 25 missionaries in those countries. Again, I'd never heard of this guy before. So the Schofield Reference Bible is published in 1909. So that's not until 19 years after he started this mission agency. So the Schofield Reference Bible will be something he did, later on in his life. Okay. All right, whoops, okay. Get everything down about that? So he had quite a diverse career. Military general and a lawyer in the White House, pastored a church in Texas, started a Bible college in Pennsylvania, founds a mission agency, serves time. I don't know how much time he actually spent in South America. He founded the mission agency, but I don't think that he didn't go down there to serve as a career missionary. But he was greatly used of the Lord. And I can tell you that the Scofield Reference Bible made a huge impact. People felt like, now I can actually study the Bible on my own. There are lots of cross references to Old Testament passages and things. And it really, I still have that was the first Bible my mom ever got me when I became a Christian. Still have that. Well, let's at least start this one. So who's that guy?
Jim Elliot.
How many T's are? Yeah, how many L's? There's a reason why I'm asking this.
2 L's and 1 T.
Yeah, and who's the other Elliot that we studied? This said 1 L.
Because he came first.
Yeah, what was his name? His first name. Remember his name?
Yeah.
Huh? No. It starts with J, but it's not Jim. James. Most common name in America. John. Well, it's the most common, but yeah. So remember John Elliott, 1 L, because he's the first one. Jim Elliott, 2 L's, he's the second one. Right? How many of you have, besides his book, you've read a book written by probably his widow? Have you read books? Okay. Through Gates of Splendor, there are several books. After he died, his widow wrote several books. She's actually probably better known in the world today than he was. But that's a picture of him. And these are his buddies. So when you think of Jim Elliot, you really have to think of the team. Okay? These guys weren't all from the same mission agency. They came from different agencies. But they were all serving in what country? Ecuador. So here's one of the Latin American countries, where Scofield's influence is seen. So Ed McCully, Pete Fleming, Jim Elliot, Nate Saint, Roger Udarian. Do you guys know anything about these other guys? Any of these other guys?
Was Nate Saint the pilot?
Yes. He would be the one that would probably be next well known after Jim Elliot. Mm-hmm. He was the pilot. And you might not like him much if you hear there was a lady that became a very good pilot, but she had a bad landing once and messed up an airplane, and he referred to her as a woman driver. Oops. She was actually a very good pilot. She was part of the WASP movement. Oh, brother, Women's Aviation Service. Something in World War II. Near the end of World War II, women started flying more. Anyway, Nate Saint was the pilot, and a very accomplished pilot. Now his son, remember his son's name? He wrote a book. Okay. His son was Steve Saint, and his son wrote the book, The Great Omission, talking about the lack of missionaries today. And his son was also instrumental in producing a documentary about what happened in Ecuador. Anybody remember what the name of that is called? Have you watched? Anybody seen that?
Was that The End of the Spear?
Yep, it was called The End of the Spear. It's a documentary. It's worth watching. You probably find it on YouTube and watch it. The End of the Spear. And there are one of the guys. There are a couple of Ecuadorians that were actually involved in killing these guys that later came to Christ. And they're part of that documentary. It's really fascinating. Yeah, most of them were athletes. Roger Udarian was on the football team. I think Jim Elliot played football as well. But the other two, McCully and Pete Fleming aren't as well known. And some of them had wives, okay, too, that were involved in this whole thing. By the way, you don't pronounce the word Auca today when you refer to that tribe. Why? Well, Auca is kind of it's kind of a synonym for, like, savage or cannibals. It's kind of a derogatory term. So today they're called by another name. Does anybody know what that tribe is referred to as today? The Waodani tribe, Waodoni, I think it was. So that's the right word. But back then, it wasn't a big deal. People would use these terms, and that's just the way it was. There's a museum in St. Louis that shows actually parts of the airplane that were retrieved out of the water after what little bit was left of it. There's a model of the original plane up there. So I've never been there. I'd like to go sometime. Really cool. So Operation Auca, we have a few minutes. All right. Okay. So we're talking the year 1955. So we've leapfrogged ahead now for several years, okay? Ecuador. There had been activity in Ecuador in the past. These guys were the first ones. New tribes had a mission in Bolivia, which is, I think it borders on Ecuador. And just 12 years before this, 8 Shell oil workers had been killed by the Aucas in Ecuador. They were out establishing a drilling operation for crude oil for the Shell oil industry, and they've been attacked and killed. So, what happened with Jim and Elliot and his crew was not the first time that the Auca Indians had a reputation for being violent. Okay, so here's what they did. Do you remember why they wanted to do this mission in secret? They didn't want it to get out. Why?
They didn't want the publicity, because then if people started coming, then some people would come to interview them.
Right. All you gotta do is leak this to the media, and all of a sudden people are coming in with their cameras and microphones, and all that's gonna do is scare the natives. Okay, so they had to keep it. Now, who else didn't they tell besides the media?
Their missions
They
agency.
didn't let their mission agencies know, and some people would actually kind of criticize them for that. They didn't tell their churches, they didn't tell their mission agencies. This was a secret just among them. And you can go back and forth on that. Were they right or wrong for doing that? I don't know. But let God be the judge of that. Okay, but they felt that this is what they needed to do. So it was not authorized by the agencies that they represented, and not by their churches. It's possible that somebody from one of the churches maybe knew about it, but not as far as we know. So the missionaries did not want the press involved, the media. Okay, nobody really knew about this. So, what was the strategy? Well, it's time to go. We'll talk about the strategy next time on Monday after Thanksgiving. Friday, next chapter of our book. Thank you.
Quiz on Friday?
Yeah, yep. Yeah, I don't want you to go away, without having something to remember.